All right, good evening, Corrales Cubs, and welcome to our YouTube live stream. I am here with two former Cubs. We've got Caitlin and Zane with us tonight to, I think, play some bagpipes and tell some stories. If you don't know, they're Miss Ursula's children. You might have seen them around campus every now and again. And I'll go ahead and let them take it away for us. Welcome, you guys.
Hi! Hello, everybody. My name's Caitlin, and this is Zane, and we are Corrales alumni. And one of our most favorite Corrales traditions is a bagpipe social that happens around the holiday season. And so Zane is going to share a couple of songs, and I'm going to read a fairy tale. All right, so I'm going to read a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen called The Fir Tree. And I don't have any pictures, so we're going to have to use our imagination to know the story. Far away in the deep forest, there once grew a pretty little fir tree. The sun shone full upon him. The breezes played freely round him, and near him grew many other fir trees, some older, some younger. But the little fir tree was not happy, for he was always longing to be tall like the others. He thought not of the warm sun and the fresh air. He cared not for the merry prattling peasant children who came to the forest to look for strawberries and raspberries. Sometimes, after having filled their pitchers or threaded the bright raspberries on a straw, they would sit down near the little fir tree and say, "What a pretty little tree this is." And the fir tree would not feel happy. "Oh, that I were tall as the other trees," sighed the little fir. "Then I should spread my branches on every side, and my top should look out over the world. The birds would build their nests among my branches, and when the wind blew, I should bend my head so grandly that the others do." He had no pleasure in the sunshine, in the songs of the birds, or in the rosy clouds that sailed over him every morning and evening. In winter, when the ground was covered with the white glistening snow, a hare would sometimes come scampering along and jump right over the little tree's head. And then how miserable he felt. However, 2 winters passed away, and the third the tree was so tall that the hare was obliged to run around it. "Oh, if I could but grow and grow and become tall and old," thought the tree. "That is the only thing in the world worth living for." The woodcutters came in the autumn and felled some of the largest trees. This happened every year, and our young fir, who was by this time a good height, shuddered when he saw those grand trees fall with a crash to the earth. Their branches were then cut off. The stems looked so terribly naked and lanky that he could hardly be recognized. They were laid one upon another in wagons, and horses drew them away, far, far away from the forest. Where could they be going? What would happen to them? The fir tree wished very much to know, so in the spring, when the swallows and the stork returned, he asked them if he knew where the felled trees had been taken. The swallows knew nothing, but the stork looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded his head and said, "Yes, I believe I have seen them. As I was flying from Egypt, I met many ships, and they had fine new masts that smelt like fir. I have little doubt that they were the trees that you speak of. They were stately, very stately, I assure you. Oh, that I too were tall enough to sail upon the sea. Tell me, what is this sea, and what does it look like?" "That," said the stork, "would take too long," and away he stalked. "Rejoice in your youth," said the sunbeams, "rejoice in your fresh youth, in the young life that is within you." And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew wept tears over him. But the fir tree did not understand them. When Christmas drew near, many quiet young trees were felled. Some of them were not so tall as the young fir tree, who was always longing to be away. These young trees were chosen for their beauty. Their branches were not cut off. They too were laid in the wagon, and the horses drew them away from the forest. "Where are they going?" asked the fir tree. "They are no taller than I. Indeed, one of them is much less. Why do they keep all their branches? Where can they be going?" We know," twittered the sparrows. "We peeped through the windows in the town below. We know where they're gone. Oh, you cannot think what honor is done to them. We looked through the windows and saw them planted in a warm room and decked out with such beautiful things, gilded apples, sweetmeats, playthings, and hundreds of bright candles." "And then?" asked the fir tree, trembling in every branch. "And then? What happened then?" "Oh, we saw no more. That was beautiful, beautiful, beyond compare." "Is such a glorious lot to be mine?" cried the delighted fir tree. "This is far better than sailing over the sea. How I long for the time! Oh, that Christmas were to come! I am now tall, and I have many branches, like those trees that were carried away last year. Oh, that I were even now in the wagon, that I were in the warm room, honored and adorned. And then, yes, then something will still better happen. Else why should they take trouble to decorate me? It must be that something still greater, still more splendid, must happen. But what? Oh, I suffer with longing. I know not what it is that I feel. Rejoice in our love, said the air and the sunshine. Rejoice in your youth and your freedom. But rejoice he would not. He grew taller every day. In winter and in summer, he stood there clothed in green dark foliage. The people saw him and said, "That is a beautiful tree." And next Christmas he was the first that was felled. The axe cut through the wood and pith, and the tree fell to the earth with a deep groan. The pain was so sharp he felt faint. He quite forgot to think of his good fortune. He felt so sorry at having to leave his home in the forest. He knew that he would never again see those dear old comrades, or their little bushes and flowers that had flourished under his shadow. Perhaps not even the birds. Neither did he find the journey by any means pleasant. The tree first came to himself when, in the courtyard to which he had been taken with the other trees, he heard a man say, "This is a splendid one, the very thing we want." Then came two smartly dressed servants and carried the fir tree into a large and handsome drawing room. Pictures hung on the walls, and the mantelpiece stood large Chinese vases with lions on the lids. There were rocking chairs, silken sofas, tables covered with picture books and toys. The fir tree was placed in a large tub filled with sand, but no one could know that it was a tub, for it was hung with green cloth and stood on a rich, gaily colored carpet. Oh, how the tree trembled! What was to happen next? Some young ladies, helped by servants, began to adorn him. On some branches they hung little nets cut out of colored paper, every net filled with sugar plums. From others, gilded apples and walnuts were hung, looking just as if they'd grown there. And hundreds of little wax tapers, red, blue, and white, were placed here and there among the branches. Dolls that looked like men and women. The trees had never seen such things before. seemed to dance to and fro among the leaves, and high up on the top of the tree was fastened a large star of gold tinsel. This was indeed splendid beyond compare. This evening, they said, this evening it will be lighted up. Would that it were evening, thought the tree. Would that the lights were kindled, for then, what will happen then? Will the tree come out of the forest to see me? Will the sparrows fly here and look through the window panes? Shall I stand here adorned both winter and summer? He thought nothing of it. He thought till he had a barkache with longing, and barkaches with trees are as bad as headaches with us. The candles were lighted. Oh, what a blaze of splendor! The tree trembled in all his branches, so that a candle caught one of the twigs and set fire. Oh dear, cried the young ladies, and put it out at once. So the tree dared not tremble again. He was so fearful of losing any of his beautiful ornaments. He felt bewildered by all this glory and brightness. And now, all of a sudden, both folding doors were flung open, and a troop of children rushed in as if they had a mind to jump over him. The older people followed more quietly. The little ones stood quiet and silent, but only for a moment. Then they shouted with delight. They shouted till the room rang again. They danced around the tree, and one present after another was torn down. What are they doing, thought the tree. What will happen now? The candles burnt down to the branches, and as each burnt down, it was put out. The children were given leave to strip the tree. They threw themselves on the tree until all of his branches creaked, and had he not been fastened with the gold star to the ceiling, he would have been overturned. The children danced about with their beautiful playthings. No one thought of the tree any more except the old nurse. She came and peeped among the branches, but it was only to see if perchance a fig or an apple had been left among them. A story, cried the children, pulling a little fat man towards the tree. It is pleasant to sit under the shade of green boughs, said he, sitting down. Besides the tree, we may be benefited by hearing my story. But I shall only tell one tale. Would you like to hear about Avity, or Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs and yet came to the throne and won the princess? Avity, cried some. Humpty Dumpty, cried others. There was a great uproar. The fir tree alone was silent, thinking to himself, ought I to make a noise as they do, or ought I do nothing at all? For the most certainly he was one of the company, and had done all that he had been required of him. And the little fat man told the story of Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs and yet came to the throne and won the princess. And the children clapped their hands and called out for another. They wanted to hear the story of Avity also, but they did not get it. The fir tree stood meanwhile, quiet and silent and thoughtful. The birds in the forest had never related anything like this. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs and yet was raised to the throne and won the princess. Yes, strange things come to pass in the world, thought the fir tree, who believed it must all be true, because such a pleasant man had told it. Who knows but I, too, may fall downstairs and win a princess? And he thought with delight at being next day again, decked out in candles and playthings, gold and fruit. Tomorrow I will not tremble, thought he. I will thoroughly enjoy my splendor. Tomorrow I shall hear again the story of Humpty Dumpty, and perhaps that about Avity. And the tree mused upon this all night. In the mornings, the maids came in. Now begins my state anew, thought the tree, but they dragged him out of the room, up the stairs, and into the garret. And there they thrust him into a dark corner where a little light could enter. What can be the meaning of this, thought the tree. What am I to do here? What shall I hear in this place? And he leant against the wall and thought. And he had plenty of time to think it over, for day after day and night after night passed away, and yet no one came into the room. At last somebody did come in, but it was to push something old, some trunks in the corner. The tree was now entirely hidden from sight and apparently quite forgotten. It is now winter, thought the tree. The ground is hard and covered with snow. They cannot plant me now, so I am to stay here in a shelter till spring. Men are so thoughtful. I only wish it were not so dark and so lonely. Squeak, squeak, cried a little mouse, just then gliding forward. Another followed. They snuffed about the fir tree and then slipped in and out among the branches. "It is horribly cold," said the little mouse, "or it would be quite comfortable here, don't you think, you old fir tree?" "I am not old," said the fir tree. "There are many who are much older than I." "How came you here?" asked the mice, "and what do you know?" They were most uncommonly inquisitive. "Tell us about the most delightful place on earth. Have you ever been there? Have you been to the storeroom where cheeses lie on shelves and ham hangs from the ceiling, where one can dance over tallow candles, where one goes in thin and comes out fat?" "I know nothing about that," said the tree, "but I know the forest, where the sun shines and where the birds sing." And then he spoke of his youth and its pleasures. The little mice had never heard anything like it before. They listened very closely and said, "Well, to be sure, how much have you seen? How happy have you been?" "Happy?" said the fir tree in surprise, and he thought a moment over all that he had been saying. Yes, on the whole, those were pleasant times. He then told them about the Christmas Eve, where he had been dressed up with cakes and candles. "Oh," cried the little mice, "how happy you have been, you old fir tree!" "I am not old at all," returned the fir. "It was only this winter that I left the forest. I am in the prime of life." "How well you can talk," said the little mice, and next night they came again and brought with them 4 other little mice, who wanted to hear the tree's story. And the more the tree spoke of the youth in the forest, the more clearly he remembered it. "Yes," he said, "those were pleasant times. But they must come back. They must come back. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet for all that he had won the princess. Perhaps I too may win a princess." And then the fir thought of a pretty little delicate birch that grew in the forest, a real and to the fir tree a very lovely princess. "Who was Humpty Dumpty?" asked the mice. In answer, the fir told the tale. He could remember every word of it perfectly, and the little mice ran and jumped with joy. The next night more mice came, and on Sunday there came also 2 rats. The rats, however, did not find the story at all amusing, and this annoyed the little mice, who, after hearing their opinion, could not like it so well either. "Do you know only that one story?" asked the rats. "Only that one," answered the tree. "I heard it on the happiest evening of my life, though I did not then know how happy I was." "It is a miserable story. Do you know none about pork and tallows? No storeroom story?" "No," said the tree. "Well then, we have heard enough of it," returned the rats, and they went away. The mice, too, never came again. The tree sighed. "It was a pleasant when those 2 busy little mice sat around me listening to my words. Now that too is past. However, I shall still have pleasure in remembering it when I am taken from this place." But when would that be? One morning, people came and routed out the lumber room. The trunks were taken away. The tree, too, was dragged out of the corner. They threw him on the floor, but one of the servants picked him up and carried him downstairs. Once more he beheld the light of day. Now life begins, thought the tree. He felt the fresh air, the warm sunbeams. He was out in the court. All happened so quickly that the tree quite forgot what he was looking, and he was to look at himself. He was out. There was so much to look all around. The court joined the garden. Everything was so fresh and blooming, the roses so bright and so fragrant, clustered round the trellis work. The lime trees were in full blossom, and the swallows flew backwards and forwards, twittering. "I shall live, I shall live." He was filled with delight and hope. He tried to spread out his branches, but alas, they were all dried up and yellow. He was thrown down on a heap of weeds and nettles. The stars of gold tinsel that had been left on his crown now sparkled in the sunshine. Some children were playing in the court, the same merry youngsters who at Christmas time had danced around the tree. One of the youngest of them saw the gold star and ran to tear it off. "Look at this, still fastened to the ugly old Christmas tree," cried he, trampling upon the boughs so they broke under his boots. And the tree looked on the flowers of the garden, now blooming in the freshness of their beauty. He looked upon himself, and he wished his heart he hadn't been left to wither alone in the dark corner of the lumber room. He called to mind his happy forest life, the merry Christmas Eve, and the little mice who listened eagerly when he related the story of Humpty Dumpty. Past, all past, and said the poor tree. Had I but been happy as I might have been, past, all past. And the servant came and cut the tree into small pieces, heaped them up, and set fire to them. And the tree groaned deeply, and every groan sounded like a little explosion. The children all ran up to the place and jumped about in front of the blaze. But each of these heavy groans in the fir tree thought of a bright summer's day, of Christmas Eve, or of Humpty Dumpty, the only story that he knew and could tell. And at last the tree was burned. The boys played about in the court. On the chest of the youngest sparkled the gold star that the tree had worn on the happiest evening of his life. But that was past, and the tree was past, and the story also past. For all stories must come to an end one time or another. All right, we're going to play one more song. Thank you all for listening. We had a wonderful time, and we hope you have a wonderful holiday with your families.
Thank you so much, Kate and Zane, for sharing your gifts with us. I didn't know you were both so talented. It's great to see your return. We really appreciate it. I hope you both have a Merry Christmas and a happy 8th night of Hanukkah, and of course, a Happy New Year. Thank you for playing Old Lang Syne for us. That was great. And Corrales students, will see you all back on Google Meet tomorrow morning for our last day before winter break.